Good evening, everybody. My name's Gary Thornton, and for my sins, I'm your host tonight. Messages popping up. Before we start, Michelle, I've just got a question for you here, and it's a Zoom question.
Yeah.
A participant requests that live transcription be enabled for the meeting.
Okay, oh, right. So all you need to do, or you should be able to do, is if you move the mouse and make the toolbar appear at the bottom, you should have the button that says More.
Yeah.
Oh, and it has been enabled. You're good.
Right. Let's click the button. Okay. Well, we're slightly late, but once again, good evening, everybody. My name's Gary Thornton, and I'm going to be your host tonight. So for everybody who's here, 3 messages to start. The first thing is to let you know that we are recording. So if anybody has any objection to that, then it's been nice seeing you, and you can watch the recording later. If you have any questions as we go through, please put them into the chat, and then the panelists can select and answer the question at the end. And that's it. We'll be starting at 7 o'clock, and we're now 7:04, so we best get on with it. So first of all, I just want to give a little bit of background to the specialist groups that are here tonight. My specialist group is the Learning and Development Specialist Group, and the L&D Specialist Group is for everybody who's involved in the development, delivery, or management of learning to IT and communications professionals and users. So basically a wide group. The members that we've got just short of 1,000 members, and the members come from a wide range of different backgrounds. We have 18% that come from end user skills training, 18% from professional skills training, 16 from technical skills training, 16 from the university education sector, and 32% who are just people who've got general interest in IT skills. We have a website and a YouTube channel where you can see everything that we've done in the past. There are a couple of links there. Is it possible for you to pop them up in the chat, Michelle? Okay, so
yes, they will be. Just bear with me a moment.
Okay. So if you want to find out more about us, then you can follow the links and read about us and watch previous events. Typical types of things that we've done in the past is we've produced, along with SEDMA, we produced the Technical Training Management Handbook, which was a joint production between the Learning Development Specialist Group and the Computer Education Managers Association. And that was launched in April 2019, and it's available in the bookshop as a hard copy or on your Kindle or whichever reader. We're quite active on social media. We have a Twitter, which is at BCS L&DSG. As you can see there, we've got about 500 followers, so you can follow us on there and see what we're up to. We have a number of events going on this year, following the four pillars of the BCS strategy, if you like, the committed statements from BCS. And we're going to be talking about one of those tonight. We have an event coming up, which is May 16th between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. And it's going to be a streamed event and something that we're doing with SEDMA. And it's everything to know about certification for IT professionals. So if anybody's interested, it's on our website. You can find the details there. Okay, now a little bit about the Green IT Specialist Group. The objective of the Green IT Specialist Group is to act as a voice for the IT sustainability agenda. So anything to do with sustainability and energy saving. Again, there's a wide range of different members, from public sector, private sector companies, education and academic research, universities, and from technology firms and consultancy firms. So again, wide-reaching specialist group. The aim of the Green IT SG is to call upon the wider community to reduce the use of power and its associated carbon emissions and the use of non-sustainable sources for materials used in manufacturing. So again, very topical. The Green IT Specialist Group, again, has got a website and videos and presentations of its past events. These can be found on these links as well, so I won't go too much into that. You can look afterwards. So now we're getting into the, that's the introductions done. So now we're getting into the theme of tonight. And where we're coming from tonight goes back to the BCS campaign goals. BCS has identified 4 themes, which we, or BCS, as the professional organisation for IT, need to focus on to ensure that we are making IT good for society. So that's, very vague sort of statement, so it can include an awful lot of different themes. The one that we're interested in tonight is the bottom one, which is highlighted in red. And the statement is that BCS believe that the world will achieve net zero more rapidly with support from digital and data technologies. So that's where we're coming from, and we'll be discussing that in greater detail. Okay, so our panel tonight, talking about net zero, and the question that we're asking is in line with the BCS theme that I've just read out. Are current digital and data technologies and trends promoting net zero, or are they preventing it? Are they working against it? And we may get some interesting thoughts on the matter as we go through. So now it's time to introduce the experts here. I don't know what happened there.
You went back a slide, forward a slide too quick. That's it.
Yeah,
Go back.
there we go. Yeah. So the panel tonight then is Mark Acton. We have quite an esteemed panel here tonight, so I'm going to embarrass them. Mark Acton. So Mark is well known on the international circuit. He's a regular public speaker at events right across Europe, and he's a recognised industry advisor on data centre technical issues, and he has been for quite a number of years. He's very heavily involved in European and international data centre standards and the development of the standards through CENELEC, ETSI and the ISO. So he has a good voice in the industry. Mark also acts as a representative on various technical committees right across the data center community. And he is the current chair of the Best Practice Committee for the European Code of Conduct for Data Center Energy Efficiency. So that's actually something that was put together by the BCS Data Center Specialist Group back in the day. So BCS have actually been involved in this for quite a while, or BCS members have been involved in it for quite a while. And it's just, I think yesterday just got back from a big shindig over in Europe, haven't you, Mark?
No, it was last week, Gary. Yeah, it was the Data Cloud conference in Monaco, which was a good event. It's nice that these events are actually now happening again.
Yeah.
in terms of net zero, I'm not sure the contributions in terms of flights, etc., were that helpful, but nonetheless, it was a good show to be at.
Yeah. Okay. Next on the panel, we have Ian Bittlin, and Ian is a consulting engineer now. He's had various roles in the past, and he's been a visiting professor at the University of Leeds. He's well known for his sometimes off the wall or tangential views on certain matters. So hopefully he'll share some of those with us tonight. Known Ian for a number of years, and is always interesting with his insights into things. And amongst his other positions, Ian is the former member of the BCS Council. So again, BCS involvement going back a while. We were hoping to have John Booth here tonight as the third member. John unfortunately can't make it because he's currently out there actually at the sharp end, saving the world and ensuring net zero is delivered. It was due to be here, but his company have won a small project with an international cloud operator, and he's having to do a presentation on the European Code of Conduct, probably around about now. So he can't make it. John is the vice chair of the Green IT SG, so those of you who are in the Green IT will know him already. Okay, so at this point, I think we can have a poll. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Yes, I did. There we go. Let me launch the poll if I can. Launch. Can you all see that poll?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Right. Yep, somebody's participating, so it's obviously out there. So we have the question then, what is net zero? So it's a single choice answer, and let's see what we get. Okay. So we've got 6 out of 11 people responded. So give it another few seconds, and then we'll end the poll. Okay, so it's quite interesting, the question there. The options were, what is net zero? A complete ban on the burning of fossil fuels like coal and gas, and nobody has gone for that. That all energy needs will be met by green electricity from sustainable sources. 6 out of 7 people who responded, so 86% of people have gone for that. At least 100% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. 1 out of 6 has gone for that, and an unrealistic target, nobody's selected that one. So that's quite interesting really, because net zero is actually defined in the by the UK Parliament as at least 100% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels by the year 2050. So when we're politicians talking about net zero 2050, this is what they're meaning. And it's called net zero because it's not a complete ban on emissions. It says that some emissions can remain, providing that they are offset by some type of removal scheme from the atmosphere, or by trading carbon units. So that's really quite interesting. There's a lot of room for wiggling in there, and I'm sure we'll get to that in the discussion later on. Okay, so the government have defined that as the target, and how are they going to get there? Well, we hear things in the press and in the media and in technical journals all the time. And there are a number of things on the way. A low carbon energy mix, whatever that might be. New energy backup or storage schemes. Okay, possibly batteries, possibly some other type. Hydrogen as alternative to gas. Electric vehicles. We're now in the the situation where the UK government expect or predict that by the year 2030, that over 50% of all vehicles on the road will be electric vehicles. There's a lot of publicity about heat pumps. Questions about whether these are realistic options. There are some interesting carbon management stroke offset schemes and power purchase agreements in the offing. And I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder on that, but I'm sure that we'll have some opinions. And then there's, the whole thing about how do we afford it? How do we finance net zero? Is everybody happy to see 25% additional, premium put onto their electricity bills, for instance? And it throws up some dilemmas with the public. Three quarters, the interesting dilemmas generally are that the public like these things as long as they don't have to pay for them. So 3/4 of Brits want low carbon alternatives. This is from a survey that was done last month, but only 6.2% would be willing to pay for heat pumps. Okay. The other side of it is that the Tesla Model 3 was actually the second best selling car in the UK in 2021. And it shipped around about 40,000 units. Sorry, 30,000 units. So electric cars, maybe they're taking off. And the one that really interests us, I guess, tonight is the increasing demand for more and more digital services and technology, 5G, and streaming videos, etc., are all driven by the public, the same public that want to reduce their energy requirements are driving the increase in the energy requirements. And there are several statements there which we might question that have been put about by the press and by people within the IT sector. Data centers will consume 1/5 of Earth's power by 2025. That's a statement that's put about. Mark might have a different view on that. 5G.
Yeah, you're totally right, Gary. I have a very different view on that.
Yeah. A 5G base station is generally expected to consume roughly 3 times as much power as a 4G base station, and more 5G base stations are needed to cover the same area. So the upshot of that is that a lurking threat, these are quotes, a lurking threat behind the promise of 5G delivering up to 1,000 times as much data as today's network is that 5G should also consume up to 1,000 times as much energy in order to do that. And possibly Ian will have some good trend figures on things like that. So that's enough of me rabbiting on. So let's get into the crux of it now. So our digital and data technologies and trends promoting or preventing our move towards net zero. And I think the questions that we might ask fall into two separate or two different ideas. The first thing is, can we reduce the energy directly used to provide digital services? And the answer to that might be yes, no, somewhere in between. And then we'll move on to a discussion of, can we use digital technologies to help other sectors to reduce their energy usage based on the lessons we've learned or the smart application of IT systems? Okay. So I think on that front, let's go to Ian then.
Okay.
So what's your view then, Ian, on how can we reduce the energy directly?
We started talking about sustainability, and the industry is obsessed with the word sustainability. And if you've ever studied today sustainability, you'll know that sustainability always begins with the reduction in demand. And that's the last thing we are doing with IT, a reduction in demand. So you have to decide up front whether you're prepared to ignore the growth in data and worry about the network and the data center and how effective it can be. I hesitate to use the word efficient, because data centers are not efficient. They are zero efficient, because we know what goes in and we know what comes out. It's waste heat. Sustainability is a real greenwash subject. So the question is this: reduce the energy directly to use to provide. We actually have done that for 25 years. Unfortunately, the demand's gone up faster than we can actually reduce the energy demand. So IT hardware over the last 25 years is 400 times. For 2000, the growth has been 2,700 times in 20 years in terms of volume of data in Europe, and the hardware has gone up at least 400 times in capacity per watt. So the hardware itself, the servers, the routers, the storage systems have done a fantastic job of reducing the demand per unit of compute or storage or transmission. Unfortunately, we, the public, use it more and more and more and more. And we followed, God bless us, we followed Javon's paradox in 1865, who was talking about coal, and the oil companies still use it to plan petrol consumption. If you raise the price of it, consumption goes down. If you reduce the price of it, consumption only goes up in terms of volume, because more and more people can avoid it. And here we are at the moment now. We should all be, God forbid, we should all be paying about £100 a month for our 5G network connection on our phone. Luckily, there are only about 4 places in the country you can use it. But the point is, it's being offered now for the £30–40 a month. And so you can immediately see that rich places will go down that route, and poor places will be left further and further behind. So 50% of the world doesn't have an IT connection, an internet connection, and they're the places where climate change is going to hit first. So the question is, and one of the statements you raised at the beginning, and then I'll shut up and let Mark have a say, but one of the statements you said about 1/5 of the world's power will be used by IT is not correct, but I know plenty of places where it will be correct. And one of them is at least in Europe, and that's Ireland. Dublin, before too long, will be consuming 20% of its grid in IT. So it depends on subsidies, it depends on language, it depends on accessibility to work, workers, skilled people, depends on lots of things. So there are places in the world where it's going to reach 40% by 2050, and there are places in the world where they still won't have, an internet connection. So yes and no is the answer to the first question. Maybe I'll let Mark have a stab at that.
Okay, Mark. Well, you're involved with the European Code of Conduct for data center energy efficiency, aren't you, Mark? So you're at the sharp end, and fully up to speed with what's going on there. So perhaps you could give a little bit of historical perspective to the audience, that back in the day before the code, back in 2008, with PUEs, have we seen a massive improvement since the code has been in place?
Well, I think, to Ian's point, we have in effect reduced the energy consumed or the power consumed to power data centers in real terms, albeit that obviously demand has grown. So we have become more efficient. The code was originally published in 2008. It's been revised every year since then. And yes, the best practices that it represents and reproduces do absolutely improve the efficiency with which we use power in the data center. But you know, data centers, two things, and I am talking about data centers rather than digital service, and I'll get on to digital services probably in a second. But the reality is that, you know, what actually consumes the power in a data center is the IT load. The only thing we've actually done really in the last 10 years is reduce the overhead that the building puts on the IT load. So the overhead that a building puts on it, you know, is things like the cooling, it's the power, the conversion of the UPS units, it's charging the batteries, it's running the cooling, the fans, you know, the pumps, etc., that will provide the cooling. That's the overhead, and we have done an extremely good job, I think, of reducing the overhead in data centers. Not in every data center, because there is an awful lot of legacy sites out there. Ironically, many of them in the public sector. Where, you know, they're old sites, they haven't really either got the money to improve those sites, or in some cases the understanding and experience, and they're very old sites. You know, they were built 20, 25, even 30 years ago in some cases. So yeah, are we doing a better job? Yes, we are. We are certainly minimizing the overhead. As Ian has already said, you know, the IT equipment that sits in data centers and in fact provides the services for our digital infrastructure generally is far more efficient, but the demand has grown, you know, pretty much exponentially. The idea that we're going to be consuming a fifth of the, you know, global power supply by 2025 is ludicrous, frankly. If we look at it on a global scale, data centers, there are no precise figures, but you know, from the various studies that have been performed, data centers probably consume 1% or so of the global power production at the moment, maybe 1.5% if you stretch it. ICT generally is 2 to 2.5%. So, you know, data centers are merely half of what we're consuming through digital services generally. The idea that we're going to increase data center usage or digital services usage by 19, 18, 17% or so over the next 2 or 3 years is laughable, frankly. So whoever said that is clearly smoking something they shouldn't be. But there are ways I think we can reduce the energy directly to provide digital services. Yes, I think we need to be smarter about how we use the equipment that supports those digital services. You know, for instance, you'll hear a lot of people talking about idle servers or zombie servers, you know, basically machines that are sitting there not actually doing anything. And I think within the ICT sector generally, we have an awful lot of equipment that is there either because it was installed and never deinstalled. You know, we're very good at installing new equipment. We're actually pretty poor at taking old equipment out. So I think, you know, there's a lot of equipment that sits there idle. There's a lot of equipment that sits there idle because it's just underutilized. You know, we don't utilize equipment very heavily. We shy away from overloading equipment in case it, you know, peaks and drops out. So it's a service availability issue. I don't think we write particularly efficient code. I think software development is a huge area for improvement. You know, we don't write software other than for phones, obviously. But generally speaking, for core digital services, we don't really write code that considers energy efficiency. We do it on phones for batteries, obviously, but in general terms, we don't. You know, so we have a lot of very inefficient code. Equipment's not turned off, as I suggested, and really, you know, the kind of power supplies that are used in ICT equipment tend to be cheap. They're not particularly efficient. The equipment itself is not particularly. So I can do a huge amount, and that's before we even start getting to the, you know, the substrate chips that we're actually using. I mean, silicon has, as Ian suggested, has kind of probably come to the end of its life almost in terms of improving power performance. You know, we're at the point where the paths on the chips are so small that, you know, electron leakage is becoming a major problem, and we have to put more and more power into the chip to prevent the electron leakage. So the smaller we make the transistors, the more problems we have actually driving those chips. So I think there will be, or there has to be, I think, some change in material science that takes us to a new generation of chip beyond silicon. Whether it's graphene, whether it's something else, you know, I'm certainly not going to predict what it's going to be, but there will have to be some sort of change. People talk about quantum compute. Well, yeah, quantum will help in certain areas, and it certainly will be happening, and it will be much faster. But you've got to remember that quantum computing works very, very different to the current digital computing. It's not the same thing. And it won't necessarily replace a lot of the digital compute that we use at the moment. So can we reduce it? Yes, there are various mechanisms, lots of things we can do. Are we currently doing all of those? Probably not, as well as we could be. Ian, I think you've got a point.
Yeah, thanks. I think neither of us have yet actually addressed the elephant in the room, which is can we reduce the energy directly? Yes, if we reduce the use of IT.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, of course, but that's really hard to do. Putting the lid back on Pandora's box. So what do I mean by reduce the use of IT? The second question is not what I'm talking about. Using digital technologies to reduce energy usage is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fact that 60% or more of the internet traffic of the world, which takes energy to produce, transmit, consume, regurgitate, and distribute, is YouTube and pornography.
Yeah.
So who are we kidding about sustainability? Who exactly are we kidding? We could do something about our problem, because I mean, Mark said it really well. On a global scale, maybe 1%. On a Dublin scale, maybe 20%.
Yeah, of course,
But so what? On a global scale, what are we kidding? Who are we kidding? We're kidding ourselves by thinking that we can be green when we are not behaving green in the consumption end of the model.
Absolutely.
And Mark actually mentioned that. I was struck today by something. I'll give you a clue. I was looking at my TV thinking, it's about time I changed it. And I had a look at glass.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I thought, hang on a second, there's something wrong here. It's got no wires, it's got no dish. And yet I can stream video at 100 megabits a second. What am I doing? I'm actually overloading the power consumption curve for that service, which is in that case just video, just entertainment video. I'm overloading the circuits simply because I can't be bothered to plug something in and use a satellite.
Yeah.
And yet that behavior is being encouraged by us as the industry to sell to people the idea of, look, you don't want that box there, you don't want these cables there, you don't want this, you don't have a unit that just goes on the internet. And all of a sudden you can see why the data traffic has grown so much. So I think, although we probably won't talk about it a lot tonight, I think we need to accept the fact that if we want to talk about sustainability, we should address it at the first step. The growth in data traffic. For anyone that's listening, if they're interested in the second and third steps, they're actually telling, because the second step is PUE. The second step in sustainability is improving your overhead, the efficiency of your process. And as Mark said, we've done a pretty good job, really, except for the last 5 years when it's stagnated. Why is it stagnated? Because you get to a certain point at 1.3, we're at 1.2, 1.3, where you can't actually save any more without taking risks, and we're fairly risk-averse industry. So we've gone from north of 2 in 2008, 3 was not uncommon, although we never measured it then, but north of 2 to, let's say, an average of 1.6, with partially loaded data centers in Europe, 1.7 maybe, in the EU Code of Conduct, and not getting any better. But the volume of traffic that they're handling is vastly greater than 2008. So Mark was perfectly correct in saying we've done a very good job. If you combine the data center and the IT hardware and talk about it as a sustainable unit, we've done a fantastic job. Unfortunately, we're being overwhelmed by this tsunami of data, which is 60%, more than 60% of it is YouTube and porn.
And I think, Ian, you said quite rightly earlier that, at the moment it's too cheap. If we want to reduce the energy used, we've got to make it more expensive. At the moment it's incredibly cheap as a commodity. And I think we also have quite a few, we have a big education element in this. People don't understand that when they're streaming something, they're consuming energy in digital infrastructure. They just think it's the device that's in their hand or the device that's on the wall. People don't realize there's a knock-on effect, that it's using networks, it's using storage in a data center somewhere, it's using processing in a data center somewhere. So, I think people need to be educated. And if a lot of people who are on the sort of the pushing forward and would like to see an improvement in green, in green thinking and sustainability. I think if they realised the overhead they were creating by posting their cat videos or whatever, they'd probably think twice about doing it.
I had an interesting conversation the other day with somebody. Well, not the other day, actually, it was before COVID, but it seems like the other day. I met a very well-educated lady in BBC Gloucestershire, in the radio studios, and she said that she had. As a family, they decided to stop buying CDs and stream all their music. And I said to her, well, what are you doing that for? She said, well, just save plastic. I said, well, what about the energy consumed by the streaming of the music? She said, oh, is there a lot? I said, well, more than went into the plastic of the CDs. I said, what I suggest you do, if you want to be green, you should use Spotify or whatever to sample the music. Decide what you like, then buy the CD and don't throw it away. If you do the map, and I know Mark's got involved in this in the past, if you do the map, the energy impact is huge if you follow that type of trend. But because we don't advertise that or educate people that is a logical way of behaving, they do tend to think that, oh, well, a box with no wires and no gizmos must be, and it's only the TV screen's only this thick, and it only takes 100 watts to run it, and the old one was 300 watts to run it. It must be better, and it's not.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think people do forget. They charge their phone, and from that point onwards, it's free energy, isn't it?
I mean, on Gary's first one of his first slides, I mean, I nearly burst a blood vessel when he put electric vehicles on the frigging list. They're not electric vehicles. They are vehicles. They are vehicles energized by what fuel is burnt in the grid. So in the UK, your electric car, if you've got one, is actually its carbon footprint is 60% nuclear, 60% gas, 20% nuclear, and 20% renewables. It's a 20% renewably powered car. And we don't get that, do we? People don't hear that.
People don't think about it. And I think, going back to the government's targets, Gary, the government talking about sort of net zero by 2050, and yet at the same time, they're pushing for us all to have 5G. They're pushing for all of us to have fast broadband. How does that square?
Well, it will only both of them will only drive more power consumption.
Exactly. So on the one hand, we're saying that we want to reduce power consumption, but actually we're being told by the government that's telling us to reduce power consumption or energy consumption that actually we should be, using fast broadband and every other digital service that's available, including 5G. And it's education, isn't it? One of the stats I came across recently was that if you are going to stream something, it's far more energy efficient to stream it on your phone than your smart TV on the wall, because obviously your phone is consuming that much less power to do the streaming than the big sort of 1 kilowatt giant plasma screen on the wall. And it makes perfect sense. But I mean, until someone told me, I hadn't even thought about it.
But isn't it obvious to some people that there's a difference between streaming and downloading?
Well,
I think people don't. They say, "Oh, I'm streaming that music," and you say, "Oh, how many times have you listened to it?" "Oh, 100 times." "Oh, you've downloaded it 100 times." Streaming is not energy effective. It's energy intensive, because you stream it, and if you stored it, the storage costs almost nothing in comparison. You can listen to it forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
It is, and there's many classics, aren't there, really, that that we could go on all night about, but unfortunately we've got a time limit. So let's move on then. So I mean, given that Ian has rightly said there that the path to sustainability is to reduce the the demand, that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. And despite the best efforts of the equipment providers, the data center operators, the people who design these things to make them more efficient, we're fighting a losing battle, really, because the demand is going up. So a quick question then, given that energy is going up, usage is going up, despite equipment becoming more efficient. Do you think that the the internet growth that we are experiencing, and is being pushed by the governments, to increase in the future, do you think it's even sustainable? That word again, but in different guise. Given that all the available electricity is soon going to be needed to power up government-sponsored heat pumps that don't really do the job, and cars that don't go very far and need regular recharging.
Funnily enough, there is a limit, but it's based on people with at least one eye. So the limit is how much ultra high definition TV can I consume in 24 hours? Because the internet traffic is dominated by video. It will in future be dominated by high definition video, and that's what will cause a lot of the growth. But we as humans have only got two eyes if we're lucky, one eye if we're relatively unlucky, and no eyes if we're really unlucky. The point is that most people watch TV and on their phones watch video. We're a video dominated society. There was once, Mark might even remember this, there was once, I think he was actually at the same meeting, where someone in an EU committee meeting a long time ago suggested that they make a new law that said that all phones in Europe should be low definition black and white cameras on the phones. They kicked the idea out after about 3 minutes when they realized that no one would vote for them. But actually there's a huge amount of sense in that what we produced in our phones are not telephones. They are handheld computers with a bloody good camera built into them. And in 2 clicks of a tail feather, you can take a high definition photograph, 2 megabit, and upload it on Facebook or Instagram or wherever. With 2 clicks of the thumb, don't pay anything for it, and then distribute it to the 400 people you know. Before you know where you are, you're driving that internet growth. And if we can, we probably, as Gary said, I don't think we'll ever be able to get the lid back on Pandora's box and say to people, you can't use internet services anymore. I think all we've got to do is price them properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we drive behavior through people's pockets.
I think the pricing model has to change. I mean, at the moment, a lot of that internet traffic is funded by advertising revenue, isn't it? Let's face it. People mining data sources and selling information that we are giving them or allowing them to keep about us. So yeah, I think that whole pricing model is going to change, and I think various governments are looking at that to see how they can impact behaviour. And obviously, as a result, actually focus on truly being sustainable and energy consumption, etc. So there are certainly people looking at that, but how you do it, as you say, Ian, is anybody going to ever vote?
Well, I think it's all. I don't know. It's always got to be taxed, because we've got the odd situation now where people like Facebook, for example. I always ask students in my classes these days, who uses Facebook? All the hands go up. Who pays Facebook? Hands go down. And then you say, well, okay, so how have they got a cash mountain? Google and Facebook. How have they got cash mountains, purport to be green, but yet generate so much cash when they don't have any customers? Well, it's exactly what Mark said. They sell our data. So if they give us more tools and apps and we use it more, they've got more data to sell. And then they get more money. So they're actually feeding off of the consumptive model. And the consumptive model is driving that internet power,
and driving the increase in power demand. Absolutely. So I think pricing is the pricing model just has to change. And I think again governments are doing that.
And Javon's paradox is Mr. William Stanley Javon said it was tax. Tax is the solution.
And I think he's right.
Okay, let's just quickly then, because time is marching on, let's quickly look at the second question then, which is if we can't reduce the energy that we're using to provide digital services, we might manage it as best we can, but it's going to go up. What mileage have we got with using those digital technologies to actually help other sectors to reduce their energy usage, which they would have to do if digital technologies didn't exist. We always used to use the example of email versus snail mail, didn't we, as possible on this. you know, that you send an email. And I think might be in you, Ian, somebody calculated once that it's the same as boiling the kettle.
It wasn't me, thank God. But but you see that we can't. I don't want to take this conversation back to where we've just been.
Yeah.
But the answer to the question is this: I believe, is that data services, digital services, can definitely reduce other people's energy consumption. It's through the Internet of Things. It's through all of those smart cities, smart buildings, smart transport, all of that stuff. Unfortunately, for the climate change agenda, that is a very small amount of power required. The Internet of Things might be a lot of digits, but it's not as much digits as a high definition 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
You can actually run the world on 2 gigabytes now is a 1-hour BBC program, 2 gigabytes to download it.
Yeah. And I think, I think you can think of all the kind of ways that digital technologies help us in this respect. I mean, if you think about it, the last 2 years, we've completely changed our travel habits. Some of that's been imposed, but a lot of it's actually, we've decided that we don't need to go into London every day for a meeting or the office or whatever. So we're consuming less energy on the train. We're consuming less energy flying. So in that respect, that's an obvious way digital technology can help. We are just doing less travel. We are. But I think on top of that, I think there's a bit of an old cliche, isn't there? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, we have to have digital technology to help us manage what we're doing from a sustainability perspective.
That's true.
We have to measure it better.
Yeah, that was Lord Kelvin, by the way. But
yeah, exactly.
But your point is really well made, and I think the point is that we definitely can manage many processes. But have you noticed that now you see more and more companies saying they want people to go back to their offices?
Yeah, it's
even Google want people to go back to the office because they found out that actually the business effectiveness goes down when people work from home. We are inherently lazy people, and we will, if there's no one looking over our shoulder, we will put things off till this afternoon when we might be doing it this morning. We are human. We are not machines.
Guilty as charged, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I put things off until the last possible moment. Definitely. And so there's an interesting thing about the data through COVID and the working from home. A lot of the papers said about how the digital infrastructure has generated this huge release of working from home. But if you actually look at the traffic in Europe, you can see that nothing changed in terms of the peak and the trough. The trough was at 4 o'clock in the morning and the peak was 9 o'clock at night. It's been that way for 20 years and it carried that way all the way through COVID lockdowns. Even though the peaks and troughs went up a bit, they actually were out of hours. They weren't working from home traffic. They were 4 o'clock in the morning when everyone was in bed, and at 9 o'clock at night when the 3 teenagers in the house were all streaming video.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps we'll talk about those things in a future webinar like this. I think let's move on then and bring it back to what can BCS do. BCS have got their stated objectives. The world will achieve net zero more rapidly with support. So what part can BCS play in balancing this growing demand for more and more faster and faster digital services against the demand for net zero? Is it purely a question of education and influence?
Yeah, absolutely.
Education is the key, Gary. And that's not necessarily just individuals. That's government. That is individuals, but it's government, it's business. It's at the moment, as we were saying earlier, there are lots of. It's very easy to create unintended consequences, and it's very easy to create perverse incentives with legislation or taxation or whatever. So, what we need to do is understand the problem, which I think we are doing increasingly, and then make sure that we manage according to the problem and to reduce the demand. whether that is taxation, whether it's just education and people using less or using it in a different way. But yeah, education is absolutely the right thing for BCS to do. And again, it's not just individuals. BCS has to be sort of a beacon for everybody, really. You know, business, individuals, and government.
I think it starts at school as well.
Yeah,
it starts at junior school.
Yeah.
But people should be literally taught what the consequences of living is all about. And I don't just mean IT, I mean everything. So people should be taught what's the truth about all sorts of things, meat eating and vegetarianism. What's the truth about it? You can read every conceivable theory you like, and they're all different, because everyone that's putting stuff out there at the moment is on an agenda.
Yeah.
We got to somehow get to education that gives the students at whatever age they are, including mine, the ability to cut through people's agenda and see the truth for what it is. Because we're a consumptive society, and we're a consumptive society that's driven by opinions, and those opinions are at the moment are people who could spend the money to give you your opinion. And that's why we end up with such strange points that you made up front about the 6% people who don't want to buy heat pumps. No, of course they don't. But somebody asked the wrong question, didn't they? Someone deliberately asked the question to get the 6% result. Do I want to change my boiler? I live in a place where there's no gas. I burn kerosene. Do I want to change my boiler for a heat pump? Yes, of course I do. Yeah. Do I want to pay for it? No, of course I don't. Yeah. Will I pay for it? Yes, of course I will. Because eventually, I'm already feeling guilty about it. And in fact, stupid behavior, maybe you might think. We started burning less oil because we put in a wood burning stove. Now, luckily, we live in a country with lots of timber around that you can buy fairly cheaply. But here we are using a recyclable fuel, a sustainable fuel. And so I will eventually be forced to change to a heat pump. It's the only way to go, isn't it? Yeah, of course it's not. Well, why not? Because we have a grid that we have to double in size before we can get to net zero. We have a grid at the moment in the UK which runs at about 34, 35 gigawatts power, generally on average over a year power output. We need to double that to 70 gigawatts to decarbonize all our gas boilers at home and in factories. And we need to add another 30 gigawatts to actually produce enough energy, electrical energy, to feed the electric cars.
Yeah.
So if anybody thinks that by 2050 we can triple the size of our grid, I'm afraid they're living in cloud cuckoo land, because we haven't got the space, the money, or the time. So what we've got to do is reduce consumption first. The classic model: reduce consumption, improve efficiency, then power with renewables. Otherwise, you're just wasting valuable renewable energy, which is kind of what we're doing at the moment. The biggest IT companies can afford the power purchase agreements and the virtual power purchase agreements. We haven't got onto that yet, and I don't suppose we will today. But I'll give you a perfect example of where we are in IT. Facebook builds a 50 megawatt data center in Singapore, and it opens on the first day. It's virtually full within weeks, and it's 100% renewably powered. That's really interesting, because there is no renewable power available in Singapore. And it's an island, and there's no renewables. They've got no land space for solar. The shipping lanes are full of ships, not turbines, and they import all their energy from Malaysia, generate their own, all using natural gas. Why and how does Facebook have 100% renewably powered data center in Singapore? They buy, through virtual power purchase agreements, enough carbon credits to cover their consumption.
Yeah,
that's not sustainable.
No, I think the whole thing about PPAs, VPPAs, and whether or not they're even ethical, could be a subject in itself, really. And so it's thank you for raising that. It just shows the the shenanigans that go on, really, to get the message of sustainability across when it's not really sustainable at all.
No.
Okay. I was going to ask what could we do, but I'll just ask the audience here, that if you've got any ideas for what the specialist groups can do, please put them in the comments.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, let's we might run over slightly, but let's look at the questions, if we may. So the questions should be in the chat. What have we got? Have we got any questions, Michelle?
No questions yet. If anybody does have a question, as we posted earlier, please do add it into the chat so that we can pose it to our panel today.
It'd be really good if someone could actually say they just literally didn't agree with us. That'd be a great starting point. We could go on for a few days then, arguing about it. The huge answer to most of the questions is education.
Yeah.
And the BCS, I think, is perfectly adapted to that level of campaign, more so than many others, because at the end of the day, the IET and CIBC and the IMECI are not particularly, let's say, not interested is not the right word, committed to IT subjects. The BCS should be, and it goes further than outside of the data center. It goes into the network and goes into the usage model. So the more we can educate, and I think it does actually begin at school, like most things do. That's why less people smoke now, because children were generally taught that smoking was bad for you, and they were told that at an age when they absorbed the information. And of course, it's obvious smoking is bad for you, but old buggers like me were quite happy to keep puffing on our cigars, saying, well, someone else can give up because I really enjoy this habit. Now, eventually I stopped smoking, but that's not the point, is it? The point is education begins with the young, and it's the young that will suffer from climate change, not us.
Yeah, indeed. I think, education is the key here, but it'd be interesting to see how organizations like BCS and the BCS members can get that message across into schools, because, we're competing with Swedish teenagers here. And, I think the schools have got their own choice on who they prefer to listen to.
Yeah. But again, you've got to try and get an educational message across. It doesn't have an agenda.
Yeah. Okay, so Michelle says we have one comment, and it's from Robert Walker. And Robert says, I do agree we should reduce demand, but how? I hear the journey to net zero, it's a procurement-led thing, but I think ESG is greenwash.
Some of it is. Yeah, I mean, some of it is. We've just been talking about greenwash and PPAs and all the rest of it. And yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is greenwash, and that's why the BCS and others need to educate properly so that we can see through the greenwash, whether that's at a corporate level or individual level. So there's an awful lot of greenwashing.
And I noticed that Viviana Sandors asked a question which has got a really interesting point. She asked whether a limitation would be the grid infrastructure or the power source. And I think from a money point of view, it's the infrastructure. Trying to triple the power lines going into London. Think about that for a brief moment in time. It's the infrastructure. But she got a lovely last point to her question. Is nuclear power plant a solution? And what's interesting about that is that I've got a real problem with the term net zero. Now, there's an international committee, IPCC, that wrote a paper and updated it several times since in 2014, which gives you the internationally agreed carbon content of electricity generation sources. And there's nothing on there that's got zero against it. Nuclear is the same as wind.
Yeah.
Solar PV is 4 times wind. gas is better than coal, but is still quite high. It's really interesting that we took, we've got such a low level of education that people think that wind power is zero carbon. Even on the TV, EDF, and there's some more questions coming in, so I'll shut up in a minute. But even on the TV, EDF are advertising zero carbon electricity, and it's nuclear, wind, and solar. And none of those three are zero carbon, because you have to distribute think about it logically. A wind turbine has a big concrete base, a big steel tower, carbon fiber blades, and needs infrastructure to connect it to the grid. And all of those things take an enormous amount of carbon to produce. And the turbine only lasts 15 years. So the carbon in its production has to be amortized over 15 years. It's 14 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So what are they talking about? Zero.
Yeah.
Why is the government allowing themselves to talk about near zero?
I think one of the things that was interesting when they said net zero, the idea that you can still produce, providing that you can somehow assuage your conscience by some of the means, by either reclaiming it or buying somebody else's credits. Really,
it's a cop out, isn't it?
It's a cop out.
Yeah, and then the government said they needed to plant 1 million trees a year or something. And they ignore the fact that when you plant a tree, it's that big, and it takes 30 years for it to get to the point where you're getting valuable carbon reduction out of it.
And then someone chops it down and puts in their wood burner in.
Correct. Exactly right.
Yeah, I think the whole debate about primary power could be, again, a separate one, because you've raised some good points there about the embedded energy in wind power and all the rest of it. Gets even worse, doesn't it, when you hear that there's a scheme afoot to classify gas as low carbon by diluting it a bit with hydrogen.
Hold on a second. The Germans managed to convince the EU that gas was a sustainable fuel.
Absolutely.
That's law today, that they're allowed to claim that gas is a green fuel. Why? Because they turned off their nuclear and now they're burning brown coal again.
Yeah.
They're the dirtiest polluter in Europe, and yet they're purporting to be a green country.
No, it's greenwash, and I think it's interesting. There's a statement or a question earlier, actually. I think it's sort of scrolled up now, but talking about EU standards and should it be EU driven? So firstly, there are standards on this, but they're not particularly focused on digital infrastructure or data centers. So there are carbon reporting standards, but they're all a bit woolly, and you've got to remember that we're at the sort of fairly early stages of a journey with this. But I think one of the game changers you're going to see is the CSRD that's coming in, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is obviously European. So in Britain, that's not going to necessarily include us. But I think once you're actually starting to see people report it and being required to report, then you're going to see a better understanding of what's actually going on at the moment. People can get away with greenwash because we don't really know what's going on. It's difficult to see beyond the greenwash, beyond the numbers. When people are starting to collect the numbers and people have to report it, which they will do from 2023, or actually in 2024 for 2023, then I think you're going to see a completely different attitude.
Because that will drive their behaviour, won't it?
Also we'll have data
to work on.
We'll have data to work on. At the moment we're kind of all wet finger in the air time. We're not quite sure what we're talking about sometimes. Exactly. So we don't really have the data and the detail. And once we start collecting that data and we have the detail, then we're actually going to be able to be more responsible, and people will not get away with greenwash as much.
Yeah. Okay, I think at that point we need to draw it to a close. We started a little bit late, and I think we'll just finish a little bit late. But I think we'll just finish by asking again the audience. Ideas are always welcome. If you've got any ideas of subjects that you would like to see expanded in future webinars, whether these are the things about the how we might become sustainable by reducing the demand, or whether it's about the primary power, as Ian was talking about with the comparisons between the different types of energy, or anything else, of course.
Can I add just one thing? I don't mean to sound negative, because I think we should do everything possible in our power to reduce everything. I just don't think that giving people unobtainable targets is the way to do it.
No.
So I think we should all try and learn. We should all try and reduce, and every little bit will help. We will never get to zero. That's a fact. We're a carbon life form for a start. Yeah. We can't escape carbon. We live because of it. So the idea of having net zero is not the point. The point is we've got to reverse climate change. This isn't an IT problem. This is a climate problem. If it doesn't kill us, we don't have to do anything about it. But it's going to kill us. Sorry.
Okay, so that's a happy message there to wrap it up on then, isn't it, Ian? So if we've got any other subjects that we want to see covered, then please email either Kevin, John, or myself, and we'll pull something together for you. I'd just like to say at this point, thank you very much to our panelists for sharing their very interesting and hopefully enlightening views, putting a sense of realism to the whole thing, and really thank you, the audience, for coming along and attending, and please let us have any comments or any feedback, any questions, as we've said. And I think at that point, you've heard enough of me. So,
thanks, Gary.
So it's time to stop the recording.